Hello, welcome back to the Cosmic Consciousness series. If you haven't subscribed to me, myself, and I, do it now, drop it at the bottom, and welcome to the Unity. Today we'll be discussing Edward Carpenter, chapter 14. We've made it quite some way. After this, we've got like a bunch of little mini cases, and then this series will have to come to a sad end. But there's plenty more goodness to come, so don't worry. Chapter 14, Edward Carpenter. Part 1. He was born August 29th, 1844 at Brighton, where he spent his early youth. His father came from Cornwall. He went for several years to Brighton College and in 1864 entered Trinity Hall, Cambridge, where he obtained a scholarship, graduated in 1868 as 10th Wrangler, and afterwards was elected a Fellow of the college. So who said Cornish people couldn't be great? In due course, he was ordained and for some years acted as curate of St. Edward's Church, Cambridge, of which at the time Frederick Denison Maurice was vicar. Vicar. Oh, vicar, that's how you said it. He never profoundly believed in the historical accuracy of the Bible. Obviously, his father was a broad churchman and brought him up to think for himself. When quite young, he had made it, because he would not have made it here if he didn't, right? When quite young, he had made up his mind to take orders and stuck to that notion largely from an idea that the church could be widened from the inside. Once fairly inside, however, he found it would take a precious long time, indeed. In fine, he soon felt himself so ill at ease that a complete break with the whole thing became absolutely necessary. He was in orders from 1869 to 1874. We find him immediately after this working with approved success in a new field, that of university extension. He was at this time, from 1874 to 1880, especially known and loved in and about York, Nottingham, and Sheffield. About the same time, he began to study deeply social questions and became convinced that society was on a wrong basis and moving in a wrong direction. It was early in 1881, as he tells us, when in his 37th year, that Carpenter entered into cosmic consciousness. The evidence of the fact is perfectly clear, but it is not within the power of the writer to give details of illumination in the case beyond those given below. As a direct result of the oncoming of the cosmic sense, he practically resigned his social rank and became a laborer. That is to say, he procured a few acres of land not many miles from Dronfield in Derbyshire, built upon it a small house, and lived there with the family of a working man as one of themselves. Dressing in the common corduroy on the countryside, he took up his spade and worked steadily with the others. It seemed to him that the manners and habits of the rich were less noble than those of the poor, that the soul and life of the rich were less noble. He preferred to live with the comparatively poor and to be himself comparatively poor, in that respect, not following the example of, but participating in the instinct of that of Gautama, Jesus, Paul, Las Casas, and Whitman. Go figure, right? He retains his piano, and after his hours of manual toil will refresh himself with a sonata of Beethoven, for he is an accomplished and original musician. It is needless to say that he is a pronounced and advanced socialist, perhaps an anarchist even. He is one with the people, the common people, that is, as they call it over in the UK, made so numerous, so common, said Lincoln, because God loves them and likes to see many of them. It is childish. I could agree with that, yeah. It is childish to say, as some have thought and said, that men of the stamp live as poor men with the poor for the sake of influencing these, and as an example to the rich. They simply live as poor men with the poor, as laboring men with laborers, because they prefer the life, the manners, the habits, the surroundings, the personality of these to the life, the manners, the habits, the surroundings, and the personality of the rich. Occasionally, he descends into so-called good society, having close and dear relations there, but does not remain in it for any length of time. He loves above all things in himself and others honesty, candor, sincerity, and simplicity, and he says he finds more of these in the poor, common working people than he finds in the rich men and women who constitute society. In 1873, Carpenter published Narcissus and Other Poems, and in 1875, Moses, a drama. He began reading Whitman in 1869 and read The Leaves by Whitman continuously for 10 years thereafter. Whether Carpenter would have acquired cosmic consciousness if he had never read Whitman cannot perhaps be said, either by himself or by anyone else, but there seems little doubt that the study of The Leaves was a material factor leading up to his illumination. He is not the only man who has helped forward the same agency, and it is probable that in the world's future many thousand men and women will be in similar manner helped to the same goal. For, and in this fact, in the raison d'etre of the present volume, as the writer says, next to the necessary heredity and the right constitution that is bodily and mental, association with the minds of those who have passed the boundary into specialism is of supreme importance. He began to write Towards Democracy, the book in which he attempted to embody the teachings of the cosmic sense, immediately after his illumination. The first edition, small and thin, was published in 1883, the second, a good deal enlarged, in 1885, the third, grown into a stout, handsome volume, in 1892, and the fourth in 1896. Wow, they have so many versions of that. No better book can be read from which to obtain an idea as to what cosmic consciousness is and in what it differs from self-consciousness alone, that is. Besides Towards Democracy, okay, what we previously noted, Carpenter published in 1887 England's Ideal, in 1889 Civilization, Its Cause and Cure, and in 1893 From Adam's Peak to Elephanta, all of which are exceedingly well worth attention. Let me get some water, hold on. Wow. Part 2. In a letter to the present writer who had asked for certain facts about the new sense, he says, I really do not feel I can tell you anything without falsifying and obscuring the matter. I have done my best to write it out and Towards Democracy. I have no experience of physical light in this relation. The perception seems to be one in which all the senses unite into one sense. So true. In which you become the object. That is the object of observance. But this is unintelligible, mentally speaking. I do not think the matter can be defined as yet, but I do not know that there is any harm in writing about it. So, notes at the bottom. In the Vagasane Samhita Upanishad occurs the following verse. When, to a man who understands the self has become all things, what sorrow, what trouble can there be to him who once beheld that unity? Great unity. In another place, he has the following clear and explicit passage on the subject. Notwithstanding then the prevalence of the foot regime, that is inductive science, and that the heathen so furiously rage together in their belief in it, let us suggest that there is in man a divine consciousness as well as a foot consciousness. For as we saw that the sense of taste may pass from being a mere local thing on the tip of the tongue to pervading and becoming synonymous with the health of the whole body, or as the blue of the sky may be to one person a mere superficial impression of color, and to another the inspiration of a poem or picture, and to a third, as to the God-intoxicated Arab of the desert, a living presence, like the ancient Deus or Zeus, so not the whole of human consciousness gradually lift itself from a mere local and temporary consciousness to a divine and universal. There is in every man a local consciousness connected with his quite external body that we know. Are there not also in every man the making of a universal consciousness? That there are in us phases of consciousness which transcend the limit of the bodily senses is a matter of daily experience. That we perceive and know things which are not conveyed to us by our bodily eyes and heard by our bodily ears is certain. That there rise in us waves of consciousness from those around us, from the people, the race to which we belong is also certain. Even the world is a living thing. I mean, you could get vibes from the world itself. Like the Druids, that's how the Druids did their thing. May there then not be in us the makings of perception and knowledge which shall not be relative to this body which is here and now, but which shall be good for all time and everywhere? Does there not exist in truth, as we have already hinted, an inner illumination of which what we call light in the outer world is the partial expression and manifestation by which we can ultimately see things as they are, beholding all creation, the animals, the angels, the plants, the figures of our friends, and all the ranks and races of humankind in their true being and order, not by any local act of perception, but by a cosmical intuition and presence, identifying ourselves with what we see? Does there not exist a perfected sense of hearing, as of the morning stars singing together, an understanding of the words that are spoken all through the universe, the hidden meaning of all things, the word which is creation itself, logos, if you will, a profound and far-pervading sense of which our ordinary sense of sound is only the first novitiate and initiation? Do we not become aware of an inner sense of health and of holiness, the translation and final outcome of the external sense of taste, which has power to determine for us absolutely and without any ado, without argument and without denial, what is good and appropriate to be done or suffered in every case that can arise? If there are such powers in man, then indeed an exact science is possible. Short of it, there is only a temporary and phantom science. Whatsoever is known to us by direct consciousness, says Mills in his Logic, is known to us without possibility of question. What is known by our local and temporary consciousness is known for the moment beyond possibility of question. What is known by our permanent and universal consciousness is permanently known beyond possibility of question. Without a doubt, brother. In a later book, Carpenter has a chapter called Consciousness Without Thought, written expressly to give the uninitiated an idea of what it is meant by the words used as the title of the present volume. Here follows the chapter entire. Wow, he felt the need to really elaborate on that. Okay. Those interested in the subject had better see the book itself, as it contains other chapters almost equally important. The chapter begins, the question is, what is this experience? Or rather, since an experience can really be only known to a person who experiences it, we may ask, what is the nature of this experience? And in trying to indicate an answer of some kind to this question, I feel considerable diffidence, just for the very reason, for one, already mentioned, namely, that it is so difficult or impossible for one person to give a true account of an experience which has occurred to another. If I could give the exact words of the teacher without any bias derived either from myself or the interpreting friend, the case might be different, but that I cannot pretend to do. And if I could, the old word scientific form in which his thoughts were cast would probably only prove a stumbling block and a source of confusion instead of a help to the reader. Indeed, in the case of the sacred books, where we have a good deal of accessible and authoritative information, Western critics, though for the most part agreeing that there is some real experience underlying, are sadly at variance as to what that experience may be. Go figure, right? For these reasons, I prefer not to attempt or pretend to give the exact teaching unbiased of the Indian gurus or their experiences, because you wouldn't understand it, but only to indicate so far as I can in my own words and in modern thought form what I take to be the direction in which we must look for this ancient and world-old knowledge which has had so stupendous an influence in the East, and which indeed is still the main mark of its difference from the West. Why then? Because I made a mistake. Oh, what mistake? I don't believe in mistakes. I only believe in beauty, brothers. And first, let me guard against an error which is likely to arise. Indeed, that's what I literally just said. Thank you, Jesus. It is very easy to assume, and very frequently assumed in any case where a person is credited with the possession of an unusual faculty, that such person is at once lifted out of our sphere into a supernatural region and possesses every faculty of said region. If, for instance, he or she is or is supposed to be clairvoyant, it is assumed that everything is or ought to be known to them, or if the person has shown what seems a miraculous power at any time or in any case, it is asked by way of discredit why he or she did not show a like power at other times and other cases. How much proof do you need? How much proof could you possibly need? Against all such hasty generalizations, it is necessary to guard ourselves. If there is a higher form of consciousness obtainable by man than that which he can for the most part claim at present, it is probable, nay, certain, that it is evolving and will evolve but slowly, and with many a slip and hesitant pause by the way. In the far past of man and the animal's consciousness of sensation and consciousness of self have been successively evolved, each of these mighty growths with innumerable branches and branchlets continually spreading. Branchlets. Oh, branchlets. Is that what you call those little twig thingies? At any point in this vast experience, a new growth, a new form of consciousness might well have seemed miraculous. What could be more marvelous than the first revealment of the sense of sight? What more inconceivable to those who had not experienced it? And what more certain that the first use of this faculty must have been fraught with delusion and error? Yet there may be an inner vision which again transcends sight, even as far as sight transcends touch. I'm sorry. It is more than probable that in the hidden birth of time there lurks a consciousness which is not the consciousness of sensation and which is not the consciousness of self, or at least which includes and entirely surpasses these. A consciousness in which the contrast between the ego and the external world, and the distinction between subject and object fall away. They become one. The part of the world into which such a consciousness admits us, call it supermundane or whatever you will, is probably at least as vast and complex as the part we know, and progress in that region at least equally slow and tentative and various, laborious, discontinuous, and uncertain. There is no sudden leap out of the back parlor onto Olympus, is there? And the routes, when found from one to the other, are long and bewildering in their variety. And of those who do attain to some portion of this region, we are not to suppose that they are at once demigods or infallible. In many cases, indeed, the very novelty and strangeness of the experience give rise to phantasmal trains of delusive speculation. Though we should expect, and though it is no doubt true on the whole that what we should call the higher types of existing humanity are those most likely to come into possession of any new faculties which may be flying about, yet it is not always so, and there are cases well recognized in which persons of decidedly deficient or warped moral nature attain powers which properly belong to a higher grade of evolution and are correspondingly dangerous thereby. All this, or a great part of it at least, the Indian teachers insist on. They say, and I think this commends the reality of their experience, that there is nothing abnormal or miraculous about the matter, that the faculties acquired are on the whole the result of long evolution and training, and that they have distinct laws and an order of their own. They recognize the existence of persons of a demoniac faculty, if you will, who have acquired powers of a certain grade without corresponding moral evolution, and they admit the rarity of the highest phases of consciousness and the fewness of those at present fitted for its attainment. With these little provisos then established, I think we may go on to say that what the Nani seeks and obtains is a new order of consciousness, to which, for want of a better, we may give the name universal or cosmic consciousness, in contradistinction to the individual or special bodily consciousness with which we are all familiar. I am not aware that the exact equivalent of this expression, universal consciousness, is used in the Hindu philosophy, but Satchit Ananda Brahm, to which every yogi aspires, indicates the same idea. Sat, or the reality, the all-pervading; Chit, the knowing, perceiving; Ananda, the blissful, all these united into one manifestation of the Brahm. The West seeks the individual consciousness, the enriched mind, ready perceptions and memories, individual hopes and fears, ambition, loves, conquests, the self, the local self in all its phases and forms, and sorely doubts whether such a thing as a universal consciousness exists. As an? Oh, why did they say as an universal consciousness? No matter. The East seeks the universal consciousness, and in those cases where its quest succeeds individual self and life thin away to a mere film. Hold on, the camera's been crooked this whole time. Oh well. And are only the shadows cast by the glory revealed beyond. You gotta love the mistakes though. They really help bring out your true self. The individual consciousness takes the form of thought, which is fluid and mobile like quicksilver, perpetually in a state of change and unrest fraught with pain and effort. The other consciousness is not in the form of thought. It touches, hears, sees, and is those things which it perceives, without motion, without change, without effort, without distinction of subject or object, but with a vast and incredible joy. The individual consciousness is specially related to the body. The organs of the body are in some degree its organs, but the whole body is only as one organ of the cosmic consciousness. To attain this latter one must have the power of knowing oneself separate from the body, or passing into a state of ecstasy, in fact. Without this, the cosmic consciousness cannot be experienced. It is said, there are 4 main experiences in initiation. 1, the meeting with a guru. 2, the consciousness of grace or arul, which may perhaps be interpreted as the consciousness of a change, even of a physiological change working within one. 3, the vision of Siva, or God, with which the knowledge of oneself as distinct from the body is closely connected. And 4, the finding of the universe within. The wise, it is also said, when their thoughts become fixed, perceive within themselves the absolute consciousness, which is Sarva Sakshi, witness of all things. Great have been the disputes among the learned as to the meaning of the word nirvana, whether it indicates a state of no consciousness or a state of vastly enhanced consciousness. Both. Probably both views have their justification. The thing does not admit a definition in the terms of ordinary language alone, that is. The important thing to see and admit is that under cover of this and other similar terms, there does exist a real and recognizable fact that is a state of consciousness in some sense, which has been experienced over and over again, and which to those who have experienced it in ever so slight a degree has appeared worthy of lifelong pursuit and devotion. It is easy, of course, to represent the thing as a mere word, a theory, a speculation of the dreamy Hindu, but people do not sacrifice their lives for empty words, nor do mere philosophical abstractions rule the destinies of continents. No, the word represents a reality, something very basic and inevitable in human nature. The question really is not to define the fact, for we cannot do that, but to get at and experience it. It is interesting at this juncture to find that modern Western science, which has hitherto without much result been occupying itself with mechanical theories of the universe, is approaching from its side this idea of the existence of another form of consciousness. What they would call an error. The extraordinary phenomena of hypnotism, which no doubt are in some degree related to the subject we are discussing, and which have been recognized for ages in the East, are forcing Western scientists to go cross-eyed and assume the existence of the so-called secondary consciousness in the body. The phenomena seem really inexplicable without the assumption of a secondary agency of some kind, and as every day becomes increasingly difficult not to use the word consciousness to describe it. Well, you shit, don't you? Let it be understood that I am not for a moment assuming that the secondary consciousness of the hypnotist is in all respects identical with the cosmic consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, of the Eastern occultists. It may or may not be. The two kinds of consciousness may cover the same ground, or they may only overlap to a small extent. There's nothing, and then there's everything, brothers. That is a question I do not propose to discuss. The point to which I wish to draw attention is that Western science, though, is envisaging the possibility of the existence in man of another consciousness of some kind beside that whose workings we are familiar. It quotes Amol, the case of Barkworth, who can add up to long rows of figures while carrying on a lively discussion without allowing his attention to be at all diverted from the discussion. He's in two places at one time. We discussed this yesterday. And asks us how Barkworth can do this unless he has a secondary consciousness which occupies itself with the figures while his primary consciousness is in the thick of argument. Here is a lecturer, F. Myers, who for a whole minute allows his mind to wander entirely away from the subject in hand and imagines himself to be sitting beside a friend in the audience and to be engaged in conversation with him, and who wakes up to find himself still on the platform lecturing away with perfect ease and coherency. What are we to say to such a case as that? Here again is a pianist who recites a piece of music by heart and finds that his recital is actually hindered by allowing his mind or his primary consciousness to dwell upon what he is doing at the same time. It is sometimes suggested that the very perfection of the musical performance shows that it is mechanical or unconscious, but is this a fair inference? And would it not seem to be a mere contradiction in terms to speak of an unconscious lecture or an unconscious addition of a row of figures? Many actions and processes of the body, e.g. swallowing, are attended by a distinct personal consciousness. Right. Many other actions and processes are quite unperceived by the time, and it might seem reasonable to suppose that these latter, at any rate, were purely mechanical and devoid of any mental substratum. But the later developments of hypnotism in the West have shown, what is well known to the Indian fakirs, that under certain conditions, consciousness of the internal actions, of the internal actions and processes of the body can be obtained, and not only so, but consciousness of events taking place at a distance from the body and without the ordinary means of communication. Thus, the idea of another consciousness, in some respects of wider range than the ordinary one, and having methods of perception of its own, has been gradually infiltrating itself into Western minds. There is another idea which modern science has been familiarizing us with, and which is bringing us towards the same conception, that namely of the fourth dimension. The supposition that the actual world has 4 space dimensions instead of 3 makes many things conceivable which otherwise would be incredible. It makes it conceivable that apparently separate objects, or i.e. distinct people, are really physically united. that things apparently sundered by enormous distances of space are really quite close together, that a person or other object might pass in and out of a closed room without disturbance of walls, doors, or windows, etc. And if this fourth dimension were to become a factor of our consciousness, it is obvious that we should have means of knowledge which to the ordinary sense would appear simply miraculous. There is much, apparently, to suggest that the consciousness attained to by the Indian jnanis in their degree, and by hypnotic subjects in theirs, is of this fourth dimensional order. As a solid is related to its own surfaces, so it would appear is cosmic consciousness related to ordinary consciousness. The phases of the personal consciousness are but different facets of the other consciousness, and experiences which seem remote from each other in the individual are perhaps all equally near in the universal sense, that is. Space itself as we know it, it may be practically annihilated in the consciousness of a larger space of which it is but the superficies. And a person living in London may not unlikely find that he has a back door opening quite simply and unceremoniously out in Bombay. The true quality of the soul, said the Guru one day, is that of space by which it is at rest. Then it is everywhere. So space, as they say, is continuously expanding, right? So there's always going to be a further point, a further space beyond what you know. So the notes, C.F. Whitman says, dazzling and tremendous, how quick the sunrise would kill me if I could not now and always send sunrise out of me. We also ascend dazzling and tremendous as the sun. Oh, stupid camera. But the space, or akasa, within the soul is far above the ordinary material space. The whole of the latter, including all the suns and stars, appears to you then as it were but an atom of the former. And here he held up his fingers as though crumbling a speck of dust between them. At rest everywhere, I'm sorry, the camera keeps falling. At rest everywhere, indifference or equality. This was one of the most remarkable parts of the Guru's teaching, though for family reasons maintaining many of the observances of caste himself, and though holding and teaching that for the mass of people caste rules were quite necessary, he never ceased to insist that when the time came for a man or a woman to be emancipated, as they say, all these rules must drop aside as of no importance. All distinction of castes, classes, and all sense of superiority or self-goodness, of right and wrong even, and the most absolute sense of equality must prevail towards everyone, and determination in expression, that is. Certainly it was remarkable, though I knew that the sacred books contained it, to find this germinal principle of Western democracy so vividly active and at work deep down beneath the innumerable layers of Oriental social life and custom. But so it is, and nothing shows better the relation between the West and East than this fact. The sense of equality, of freedom from regulations and confinements, of inclusiveness, and of the life that rests everywhere, as the Guru said, belongs, of course, more to the cosmic or universal part of a man than to the individual part alone. To the latter, it is always a stumbling block and an offense. It is easy to show that men are not equal, that they cannot be free, and to point the absurdity of a life that is indifferent and at rest under all conditions. Nevertheless, to the larger consciousness, these are basic facts which underlie the common life of humanity and feed the very individual that denies them. Thus, repeating the proviso that in using such terms as cosmic and universal consciousness, we do not commit ourselves to the theory that the instant man leaves the personal part of him, he enters into absolutely unlimited and universal knowledge, but only into a higher order of perception, and admitting the intricacy and complexity of the regions so roughly denoted by these terms, and the microscopical character of our knowledge about it, we may say once more, also as a roughest generalization, that the quest of the East has been this universal consciousness, and that of the West, the personal or individual consciousness. I do agree with that. As is well known, the East has its various sects of schools of philosophy, with subtle discriminations of qualities, essences, godheads, devilhoods, etc., into which I do not propose to go, and which I should feel myself quite incompetent to deal with. Leaving all these aside, I will keep simply to these two rough Western terms, and try to consider further the question of the methods by which the Eastern student sets himself to obtain the cosmic state, or such higher order of consciousness as he does encompass. Okay, later, Carpenter has made still another attempt to explain or at least indicate the nature of the new sense. He says here, I have sometimes been asked questions about towards democracy, which I found it difficult to answer, and I will try and shape a few thoughts about it here. All right, let's go. Quite a long time ago, say when I was about 25, and living at Cambridge, I wanted to write some sort of a book which should address itself very personally and closely to anyone who cared to read it, establish, so to speak, an intimate personal relation between myself, an intimate personal relationship between myself and the reader. And during successive years, I made several attempts to realize this idea, of which beginnings one or two in verse, one for instance I may mention called The Angel of Death and Life, may be found in a little volume entitled Narcissus and Other Poems, now well out of print, which I published in 1873. None of my attempts satisfied me, however, and after a time I began to think the quest was an unreasonable one. Unreasonable because while it might not be difficult for anyone with a pliant and sympathetic disposition to touch certain chords in any given individual that he met, it seems impossible to hope that a book, which cannot in any way adapt itself to the idiosyncrasies of its readers, could find the key of the personalities into whose hands it might come. For this, it would be necessary to suppose and to find an absolutely common ground to all individuals, all, at any rate, who might have reached a certain stage of thought and experience themselves, and to write the book on and from that common ground, but this seemed at that time quite unfeasible. Years followed, more or less eventful, with flight from Cambridge and university lectures carried on in the provincial towns and so forth, but of so much dumbness as regards writing, and inwardly full of extreme tension and suffering. At last, early in 1881, no doubt as the culmination and result of struggles and experiences that had been going on, I became conscious that a mass of material was forming within me, imperatively demanding expression, though what exactly expression would be, I could not have then told. I became for the time overwhelmingly consciousness of the disclosure within me of a region transcending in some sense the ordinary bounds of personality, in the light of which region my own idiosyncrasies of character, that is, my defects, accomplishments, limitations, or whatnot, appeared of no importance whatsoever, an absolute freedom from mortality accompanied by an indescribable calm and joy. I like how he saved it at the end. I also immediately saw or felt, thank you, man, that this region of self existing in me existed equally, though not always equally consciously in others. In regard to me, the mere diversities of temperament which ordinarily distinguish and divide people dropped away and became indifferent, and a field was opened in which all might meet, in which all were truly equal. Thus the two words which controlled my thought and expression at that time became freedom and equality. You can't go wrong with that, with freedom and equality. Here's a note for it. It is important to notice that all through this exposition, as well as in Carpenter's other writings on the same subject, as whoever has read this book so far will see without further repetition, his testimony as to the phenomena of cosmic consciousness constantly runs parallel to, is often even identical with, that of the suttas of Bayman, of Yeats, and of others of the same class dealing with this subject, especially perhaps the author of the Bhagavad Gita, whatever. I can never say that right. Though it does not appear that he has, and probably he has not studied these writers. Okay, and back to Carpenter. The necessity for space and time to work this out grew so strong that in April of that year I threw up my lecturing employment. Moreover, another necessity had come upon me which demanded the latter step, the necessity, namely, for an open-air life and manual work. I could not finally argue with this any more than with the other. I had to give in and obey. As it happened at the time, I mentioned, okay, calm down. I mentioned that I was already living in a little cottage on a farm at Bradway near Sheffield with a friend and his family, and doing farm work in the intervals of my lectures. When I threw up the lecturing, I had everything clear before me. I knocked together a sort of wooden sentinel box in the garden, and there, or in the fields and the woods, all that spring and summer, and on through the winter, by day and sometimes by night, in sunlight or in rain, in frost and snow, in all sorts of great and dull weather, I wrote towards democracy, or at any rate the first and longer poem that goes by that name. Off the script, By the end of 1881, at least that's what I think I called it. By the end of 1881, this was finished, but don't blame me, though it was worked over and patched a little in the early part of 1882, and I remember feeling then that defective and halting and incoherent in expression as it was, still if it succeeded in rendering even a half the splendor which inspired it, it would be good, and I need not trouble to write anything more, which, with due allowance for the said if, that is, a strong, powerful if, friend, if I even now feel was a true and friendly intimation from the start. The writing of this and its publication in 1883 got a load off my mind which had been weighing on it for years, and I had never since felt that sense of oppression and anxiety which I had constantly suffered from before, and which I believe in its different forms, that is a common experience in the early part of life. Cool, well that's good. In the first poem were embodied with considerable alterations and adaptations a good number of casual pieces which I had written merely under stress of feeling and without any particular sense of proportion during several preceding years. They now found their interpretation under the steady and clear light of a new mood or state of feeling which previously had only visited me fitfully and with clouded beams. The whole of Towards Democracy, I may say, speaking broadly and including the later pieces, had been written under the domination of this mood. I have tested and measured everything by it. It has been the sun to which all the images and conceptions and thoughts used have been as material objects reflecting its light. And perhaps this connects itself with the fact that it has been so necessary to write in the open air. The more universal feeling which I sought to convey refused itself from me within doors, nor could I at any time or by any means persuade the rhythm or style of expression to render itself up within a room, tending there always to break back into distinct metrical forms, which, however much I admire them in certain authors and think them myself suitable for certain kinds of work, were not that what I wanted and did not express for me the feeling which I sought to express. This fact of the necessity of the open air is very curious, and I cannot really explain it. I only know that it is quite so, quite indubitable and insurmountable. I can feel it at once, the difference in merely passing through a doorway, but I cannot explain it. Always, especially the sky, seemed to contain for me the key, the inspiration. The sight of it more than anything gave what I wanted, sometimes like a veritable lightning flash coming down from it to my paper. I, a mere witness, but agitated with strange transports. But if I should be asked, as I have sometimes been asked, what is the exact nature of this mood, of this illuminate splendor of which you speak, I should have to reply that I can give no answer. The whole of Towards Democracy is an endeavor to give it utterance. Any mere single sentence or direct definition would be of no use. Rather, indeed, would tend to obscure by limiting. All I can say is that there seems to be a vision possible to man, as from some more universal standpoint, free from the obscurity and localism which specially connect themselves with the passing clouds of desire, fear, and all ordinary thought and emotion. In that sense, another and separate faculty. And a vision always means a sense of light. So here is a sense of inward light, unconnected, of course, with the mortal eye, but bringing to the eye of the mind the impression that it sees, and by means of the medium which washes, as it were, the interior surfaces of all objects and things and persons. How can I express it? And yet this is most effective, for the sense is a sense that one is those objects and things and persons that one perceives, and the whole universe, a sense in which sight and touch and hearing are all fused in identity. Nor can the matter be understood without realizing that the whole faculty is deeply and intimately rooted in the ultra-moral and emotional nature and beyond the thought region of the brain. And now with regard to the I, which occurs so freely in this book. In this and in other such cases, the author is naturally liable to a change or charge of egotism, and I personally do not feel disposed to combat any such charge that may be made. That there are mere egotism and vanity embodied in these pages, I do not for a moment doubt, and that so far as they exist, they mar the expression and purpose of this book, I also do not doubt. But the existence of these things do not affect the real question, what or who in the main is the I spoken of? To this question, I must also frankly own that I can give no answer. I do not know. That the word is not used in the dramatic sense is all I can say. The I is myself, as well as I could find no words to express myself. But what that self is and what its limits may be, and therefore what the self of any other person is and what its limits may be, I alone cannot tell. I have sometimes thought that perhaps the best work one could go if one felt at any time enlargements and extensions of one's ego was to simply record these as faithfully as one might be, leaving others, the scientist and the philosopher, to explain, and feeling confident that what really existed in oneself would be found to exist either consciously or in a latent form in other people. And I will say that I have in these records above all endeavored to be genuine. If I have said I, nature, it was because at the time, at any rate, I felt the I in nature. If I had said I am equal with the lowest, it was because I could not express what I felt more directly than by those words alone. The value of such statements can only appear by time. If they are corroborated by others, then they help to form a body of record which may well be worth investigation, analysis, and explanation. If they are not so corroborated, then they naturally and properly fall away, as mere vagaries of self-deception. I have not the least doubt that anything which is really genuine will be corroborated. It seems to me more and clear that the word I has a practically infinite range of meaning, that the ego covers far more ground than we usually suppose. At some points we are intensely individual, at others intensely sympathetic. Some of our impressions, as the tickling of a hair, are of the most momentary character. Others, as the sense of identity, involve long periods of time. Sometimes we are aware almost of a fusion between our own identity and that of another person. What does this all mean? Are we really separate individuals, or is an individuality an illusion, or again is only a part of the ego or soul that is individual and not the whole? Is the ego absolutely one with the body, or is it only a part of the body, or again is the body but a part of the self, one of its organs, so to speak, and not the whole man? Or lastly, is it perhaps not possible to express the truth by any direct use of these or other terms of ordinary language? And anyhow, what am I? There are questions which come down all to time, demanding solution, which humanity is constantly endeavoring to find an answer to. I do not pretend to answer them. On the contrary, I am sure that not one of the pieces in Towards Democracy has been written with the view of providing an answer. They have simply been written to express feelings which insisted on being expressed. Nevertheless, it is possible that some of them, by giving the experiences and affirmations even of one person, may contribute material towards that answer to these and the like questions which will one day most assuredly be given. That there is a region of consciousness removed beyond what we usually call mortality, into which we humans can pass, I practically do not doubt. But granting that this is a fact, its explanation still remains for investigation. I have said in these few notes on Towards Democracy nothing about the influence of Whitman, for the same reason that I have said nothing about the influence of the sun or of the winds. These influences lie too far back and ramified too complexly to be traced. I met with William Rossetti's little selection from Leaves of Grass in 1868 or 1869, and read that and their original editions continuously for 10 years. I never met with any other book, with the exception perhaps of Beethoven's sonatas, which I could read and reread as I could read this one. I find it difficulty to imagine what my life would have been without it. Leaves of Grass filtered and fibered my blood, but I do not think I ever tried to imitate it or its style. Against the inevitable drift out of the more classic forms of verse into a looser and freer rhythm, I fairly fought, contesting the ground, kicking against the pricks, if you will, inch by inch during a period of 7 years and numerous abortive and mongrel creations, till in 1881 I was finally compelled into the form, if such it can be called, that is, of Towards Democracy. I did not adopt it because it was an approximation to the forms of Leaves of Grass. Whatever resemblance there may be between the rhythm, style, thoughts, construction, etc. of the two books must, I think, be set down to a deeper similarity of emotional atmosphere and intention in the two authors, even though that similarity may have sprung, and no doubt largely did spring, out of the personal influence of one upon the other. Anyhow, our temperaments, standpoints, antecedents, etc. are so entirely diverse and opposite that, except for a few points, I can hardly imagine that there is much real resemblance to be traced. Whitman's full-blooded, copious, rank, masculine style must always make him one of the world's great originals, a perennial foundation of health and strength, moral as well as physical. He has the amplitude of the earth itself and can no more be thought away than a mountain can. He often indeed reminds me of a great quarry on a mountainside, the great shafts of sunlight and the shadows, the primitive face of the rock itself, the power and the daring of the men at work upon it, the tumbled blocks and masses, materials for endless buildings, and the beautiful tufts of weed or flower on inaccessible ledges, a picture most artistic in its very incoherence and formlessness. Towards Democracy has a milder radiance, as of the moon compared with the sun, allowing you to glimpse the stars behind. Tender and meditative, less resolute, and altogether less massive, it has the quality of the fluid and yielding air rather than of the solid and uncompromising earth. All the above passages from the writings of Edward Carpenter are to be looked upon as utterances of the self-conscious mind about cosmic consciousness. And towards democracy, it must be understood that the cosmic sense itself speaks, sometimes about itself, sometimes about nature, man, etc., from the point of view of itself. As for instance, "Lo, what mortal eye hath not seen nor ear heard, all sorrow finished, the deep, deep ocean of joy opening within, the surface sparkling, the myriad form disclosed, each one and all things are transfigured, being filled with joy, hardly touching the ground, reaching cross-shaped and with outstretched arms up to the stars, along the mountains and the forest, habitation of innumerable creatures, singing, joy unending, as the sun on a dull morning breaking through the clouds, so from behind the sun another sun, from within the body another body, these shattered falling. Lo, now at last or yet a while in due time to behold that which ye have so long sought. O eyes, no wonder you are intent. That day, the day of deliverance, shall come to you in what place you know not. It shall come, but you know not the time." So this is a suggestion of what the cosmic sense shows him. And it shows as it came to him, so it shall come to others as well. "In the pulpit, while you are preaching this sermon, behold, suddenly the ties and bands in the cradle and in the coffin, cerements and swathing clothes shall drop off. In the prison one shall come, and the chains which are stronger than iron, the fetters harder than steel, shall dissolve. You shall go free forever. In the sick room, amid lifelong suffering and tears and weariness, there shall be a sound of wings, and you shall know that the end is near. O loved one, arise, come gently with me, be not too eager, lest joy itself should undo you. In the field with the plough and the chain harrow, by the side of your horse in the stall, in the brothel amid indecency and idleness, and repairing your and your companions' dresses, in the midst of a fashionable life, in making and receiving morning calls, in idleness and arranging knickknacks in your drawing room, even there, who knows? I shall duly at the appointed hour come." This is almost literally true of Las Casas. It says, "There is no peace except where I am, saith the Lord. Though you have health, that which is called health, yet without me it is only the fair covering of disease. Though you have love, yet if I be not between and around lovers, is their love only torment and unrest? Though you have wealth and friends at home," I'm sorry, my poem's dying, "and friends at home, all these shall come and go. There is nothing stable or secure which shall not be taken away. But I alone remain, I do not change, as space spreads everywhere and all things move and change within it, but it moves nor changes. So I am the space within the soul, of which the space without it is but similitude and mental image. Comest thou to inhabit me, thou hast the entrance to all life. Death shall no longer divide thee from whom thou lovest. I am the sun that shines upon all creatures from within. Gazest thou upon me, thou shalt be filled with joy eternal. Be not deceived, soon this outer world shall drop off. Thou shalt slow it away as a man slows his mortal body. Learn even now to spread thy wings in that other world, the world of equality, to swim in the ocean, my child, of me and of my love. Ah, have I not taught thee by the semblance of this outer world, by its alienations and deaths and mortal sufferings, all for this? For joy, joy unutterable." So the cosmic sense finally speaks, does it? Okay, part 3, the summary. A. Illumination occurred at the characteristic age in the 37th year of our suspect. B. And in the characteristic season in the spring, it also occurred. C. There was a sense of inward light, but not strictly the usual experience of subjective light. D. There was the usual sudden intellectual illumination. E. And the usual sudden moral elevation. F. His life was absolutely governed henceforth by the new light that had dawned upon him. It held his feet, as Whitman would have said. G. He lost absolutely upon illumination the sense of sin. H. He clearly saw himself to be immortal. And I. But the best proof of cosmic consciousness in his case is his description thereof, which could only be drawn, as he tells us it was, from his own experience. Thank you.